This is Todd. This is Todd. So Sarah, why don't you tell us? I was just sort of introducing. I was talking about how we've been working with Todd Bolsinger. Talk a little bit. You and Todd have been talking a lot because you've been connecting with this particular piece.
Yeah.
Of these three pillars that have risen up, the spiritual formation, sort of expanding engagement in the next generation. And I wanted to talk about, we're just going to unpack in real time this whole image of the live oak and all that. So we'll just get it on tape. But talk a little bit about spiritual formation and these pillars and what Todd's working with us on.
Sure, yeah. So Todd's helping us kind of continue moving forward. We did a bunch of work, a bunch of listening sessions and all that to arrive at these. And then we don't want it to just kind of stop and drop it. And so he's helping us continue to live into that and flush out what each of those look like for us. And so the spiritual formation, I think we all kind of had conversation post-COVID in realizing there was this void of formation for people in general, not just for us. And in my conversation with Todd, he talks about almost like an entire generation that hasn't been formed in any way. And so a lot of the things when we talk about spiritual formation, it's language that they're not used to, that they haven't heard before, that they've never been trained up in. And so really kind of reframing that from traditional ways into new ways so that people can access it is a big deal. But it's exactly what you're saying. It's going deep. It's having these roots that are deeper so that when the storm hits, or wider, depending, I guess, on the tree, which maybe you'll talk about, but so that when the storm hits, you're able to weather it, that you are stable and secure and going to be able to go through that and come out the other side. So it's really that formation one. How can we not only serve the community, which we're really great at, but do it in a way that really embodies Jesus.
So one of the things we're going to do here at Chapelwood, and this is helpful for people who attend Chapelwood, but I think it's a helpful conversation we're going to have today for anybody, wherever you are, talking about formation. So we're beginning with, we have these three things, but we're really beginning, Todd's saying, hey, let's really focus on one to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's going to bleed into all the others. We're talking about formation. And so the first thing we started doing is we started having conversation. Okay, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What is spiritual formation? And I guess the first thing you think is discipleship, right? Or disciples. What does it mean? What does that look like?
Right.
How do you
know? When
define discipleship.
Yeah.
Matt.
So, well, John, I always think it's an apprentice. You're being an apprentice of.
Yeah, well, so we have these words and we have all these things, but then how do you measure, what are the key parts of it that come out? I mean, I think this is what we're still unpacking. Still trying to figure out is, what does it mean when we talk about spiritual formation as a focus?
Yeah.
What does that mean? More Bible studies? I make the joke that some people are in too many Bible studies.
It's not a joke, John.
We talk about being a mile wide and an inch deep. Hold on,
I didn't think
my microphone mute.
You need to be able to mute me.
Yeah, can I get one of these?
Two of those from me.
That's what I was asking earlier. Does he get to decide at will?
I'm going to mute your
timeout.
Your timeout.
If I press it twice, it's 10 minutes.
Your microphone.
3 times. 15.
So part of it is like having a conversation. Okay, what does this mean? What does it look like? So if you say you want to have a focus in your church or in your life about spiritual formation, what do you do? I mean, I think, well, there's probably no wrong answer. Well, maybe wrong answers, but there's probably a lot of right answers. And the other thing we were talking about this morning particularly was, okay, when we start having these conversations, we have a tendency to be very rational and deductive and intellectual and academic. It's like, right. So there's 7 easy steps to spiritual formation. It's kind of like the Western mind works. Yeah. And you start processing that. But then we started thinking about, well, what would help translate this in a different way? An image, a visual, a story,
right?
A narrative. And so kind of where we're landing and sort of where direction we're moving, and Jeff and I were talking about this at lunch today, is image. So, I moved here from the coast of Georgia. And on the coast of Georgia, all along the East Coast, and even on the Gulf as well, you have these live oak trees. Can you pull up a picture of a live oak?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you say live oaks, St. Simon's Island or you know, Frederica Drive, something like that.
Let's get specific.
Yeah, you just
Yeah, not to be
yeah,
too-
no one, yeah, but see how these trees. Look at the drives and how they're growing
Yeah.
there together. See, that's really cool, beautiful.
It is.
And so what's interesting is like they have to withstand very windy conditions,
Right.
hurricanes. And one of the things in finding this, so we playing off this riff, is that during Hurricane Katrina, for example, if you go to St. Charles Street in New Orleans, everything was destroyed. Not a house standing, not a building
Yeah.
standing.
Right.
And yet there's 700 live oak trees on that street
Yeah.
or in that area. They only lost 4 of them.
Out of 700.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So when you think about, you would think all the trees would be gone. You'd
Right.
think they'd all be dead. Now, immediately it's like, why is that? Well, God's pretty good at creating stuff. I've
He's all
found
right.
out.
I would
He's
say
eight.
so, yeah.
He's eight.
He's all right. But he create, in this whole, it's a blueprint for surviving hurricanes. So then I start thinking, okay, well, as we're listening to this video, I'm like, all right, I've known this, I've seen this, I've experienced this in real life in Georgia and watched these. And so what is that blueprint? And is there anything that we can translate with that image and that narrative into our lives? It's because like we've been through a lot of storms. You've been through any storms lately?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you like to talk about those?
I've got a therapist and a couple other folks, John. I'm good.
You don't want to air that out on the podcast. It's not really the place for
No,
it.
I mean,
I
so
go
we,
there.
we know, and especially I would say, since COVID, COVID was an accelerant for a lot of anxieties that everyone was already dealing with. You already have your family issues and your school issues and your community issues and your everything. And COVID kind of just did something. It's sort of like poured gasoline on the fire. So we've had to deal with denominational issues and political issues and
Yeah.
cultural issues, and it
Right.
just seems like, man, never lets up.
It's a lot.
So it is a hurricane. It's like a Cat 5 storm,
Tsunami.
like several times a year in your
Right.
own personal life.
Right.
In addition to just the normal stuff you have to wake up and deal with.
Yeah.
And so what is that blueprint? Well, they unpack these 3 things scientifically that makes live oaks really strong and unique. And I'd like to flesh this out with us because I want to see how we use this image, how we use this narrative to maybe communicate to people what it means to be formed in a way that helps you survive.
Yeah.
Right.
Because one thing people resonate with is when you say, we haven't done a good job in the church with spiritual formation, getting people ready for really difficult seasons. And I think that's why Christians have behaved so badly the last few years with things. And so the first thing they talk about is, if you look at a live oak, the trunk and the branches are spiraled. The way they move, they're spiraled and they bend. So they all flex. The trunk flexes and the branches flex. And so you have this capability first to be flexible. The second is the leaves, that when the wind hits the leaves on a live oak, they curl up into the shape of, I don't even know what a Fibonacci sequence. What is a Fibonacci sequence? They talked about this and they showed a picture on this video, and it's the shape.
It's the numbers, right? Like forming this perfect.
To see how
spiral.
it curls the spiral.
Yeah.
So the leaves, instead of like sails that catch the wind.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You find it through like all of nature, the Fibonacci sequence.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at the Milky Way
Yeah.
and look at a leaf.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's the exact same
See, this is
geometric.
where I'm just not smart at this stuff.
Yeah. It's really neat.
You just were gone that day at school when we talked about that.
In the
If you're
fourth
gone, you know, it really stinks.
Yeah.
If you're gone one day in 4th grade, you miss it.
In the 4th grade when we did the Fibonacci sequence, I missed that one. So, but if the way that the leaves, instead of being so stiff or tight that they turn into sails, and with a strong enough wind, they would just rip off the branch.
Right.
So what happens is when the wind hits them, they curl.
Right.
They curl in such a way that the air will move
With it.
through
it.
Yeah.
They kind of work with, they kind of turn into the wind, if you will, to sort of streamline themselves, which is amazing to me. And so that allows the wind to flow through very minimal friction, and then the leaves don't get torn off easily. And then the third, and probably the most important image, that is that under the ground, and I learned this one firsthand on the island, is that the roots don't necessarily go deep. We use this analogy about formation and growing with depth, right? You got to have deep roots. In a live oak, the roots are not really deep, but they're wide.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's really, really fascinating is, even more importantly, under the ground, those roots are intertwined with the roots of the neighboring tree.
Yeah.
So that when the hurricane hits a live oak in New Orleans or St. Simon's Island or Savannah or wherever, it's not hitting one tree, it's hitting a whole community of trees.
Right.
That was like blow your mind kind of stuff.
Even if they're like in a distance from each other, they're interwoven.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I learned this. Not far from where I live was a golf course called Sea Palms.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of golf courses there.
You're gonna say, not far from where you lived was a golf course.
Yeah, right. That's there's not far from where I live. There were a lot of golf courses. Well, we called St. Simon's it's a drinking community with a golfing problem, or a drinking community with a fishing problem, depending on whether you golf or you
Which
fish.
What
vice do you
season
have?
it was? Which vice?
But for example, they redid the golf course, and so if you look, like even on those images that we saw, those live oaks they grow in together around each other. So these roots are connected. Well, when they redesign this golf course, they take out trees because you got to grow grass. But some of these live oaks were very beautiful, and so they used to frame holes. So they would put it behind the green. But now it's all by itself. And inevitably, if we got enough rain and we got enough wind, you'd drive through this neighborhood in Sea Palms, and here's this one single live oak tree's toppled. And you're looking at this massive tree, and the root system is like, there's no way that tree can stay standing with that little amount of root. Well, you took the neighbors away, you took the community away, and it was never designed to withstand the storm by itself.
Yeah.
So those three things are like rooted in God's created order here around live oaks, which have a special affinity for me, just because I think they're so beautiful. And I just thought, all right, so now let's flesh this out. What are these three things? I mean, to me, the roots are easy. There's community. We can start there. But I'd be interested in also thinking about the trunk and the branches.
Yeah. And then the leaves.
Yeah. And how do they connect in some way to things that are important about? Well, let's start with community.
Yeah.
How important is that in formation? Because some people, like I said, and they do too many Bible studies, it's like all about me and my depth and my growth, and I want to go deep for me, but the community is not a part of it.
Yeah. I would want to break down community because I love the images and the pictures of those kind of those interwoven, like thousands of interwoven like root systems, right? And so community is not just one thing. It's probably a lot of things, so it's not just say like my relationship with you, it's also my relationship with a community or a smaller group of people. So I wonder if it's even concentric circles of folks that I do my life with deeply and know, like in a sense, my secrets or whatever, those things I share with people that I won't share widely, right? And it's moving out from there, those kind of depth of ways of being in the world that engender trust and vulnerability and
Yeah, but it's not just your circle, right? So you have your circles and your people walking alongside, but then it's also, like you use the example of how you're connected to John, it's what is John's circles around him, right? And how are those communities supporting him? It was interesting a minute ago, John, when you were talking about you have all these live oaks supporting one another. So when the storms come, it's not just attacking one, it's all of them, and they're all interconnected, and that's how they're able to survive, right?
Yeah.
And so when if you then translate that to an individual person, if you're going through something, you have this whole community that has been rooted, that has been nurtured, that's not just dependent on you and your circles, but also how they're developing and growing, so that as you're getting hit, you have this community that's going to send you resources and nutrients and stand alongside you and hold your roots in the ground, right?
Right,
Like keep
right,
you
yeah.
rooted and firm there so that when that storm passes, you're going to be okay. You know,
Yeah,
you're going to walk
yeah.
through it and then can turn around and do the same for those others
Yes.
that are in there. And so,
I love that.
Yeah.
It seems like when we were talking about this a little earlier, that book that's called The Hidden Life of Trees, that we used to think that a tree was a solitary
Yeah.
kind of entity.
Yeah.
Right. That was it really had to get its own water. It was
Right.
it was its own thing. And they're seeing now that in these coves that if one tree in a drought is experiencing kind of like something that might kill it,
Yeah.
all the other trees stop taking as much water and push the water towards the tree that needs it most. You never see this on the surface.
Yeah.
And so in some ways the things on the surface are the fruit and the struggle is underground. But the
Yeah.
root systems underground are all responding to the things that maybe only the root systems can detect.
Yeah.
And there's something I think about that's important to the Christian community.
Yeah.
Tolkien knew this. Remember
He did.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
the Ents?
Yeah.
The trees are alive. Oh, no, is that Narnia? I don't know.
Well, and it's
One of them, yeah,
It's in
yeah.
a lot of
But
those,
the
a lot of
Ents, yeah.
those fables and
Yeah.
stories where
When
the
they wake
trees
up.
kind of talk to
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
right.
that they are alive. That there's some sort of living, connected community with each
yeah.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that. I think that's the easiest kind of correlation to draw image, of those roots. I love the idea of seeing the roots. Maybe they're not going deep, 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 deep. They are deep, but
Yeah.
they're interconnecting with one another. And then,
Yes.
like you said, this tree is going to be interconnected to the two trees next to them, but they also are in a way connected to, like if you look at these pictures of these trees lining the road,
Right.
or if they're together by the coast, they're spaced
Yes.
out just far enough to where their roots are working with each other.
Right.
Yeah.
So this
Right.
tree is going to be connected to a tree way over here.
Where
Yes.
That's
yeah.
the point you were making.
Right,
Yes.
yeah. And may never know, the trees, I don't know, if they're alive.
Well, no, they're
as
alive.
Ents, then yes, they know each other. But yeah, you may never know that impact, right, ultimately. But by supporting one another here, what is that greater impact doing,
Yes.
right, with
Yeah.
all that connectivity?
I wonder if this is really the corrective to that kind of rugged individualism, the lie of individualism that we are built on in America,
Absolutely.
and I think is actually toppling, coming through the COVID and all those other things that happen with us, that we realize that we are connected. You can't bear false witnesses against each other. You can't run other people down
Yeah.
in your own community for the sake of your own little tree system to grow and it not affect the entire cove. You can't poison another cove and not think it's not going to also poison your own children, right? So there's a sense in which that we are connected beyond what we ever realized.
Yeah, and I think I've said this to you before, is that like I want to be a person who can be imposed on. Like we talk a lot about like I don't want to impose on you or whatever, but like I want to be the kind, and I think this reaches to those roots that you can say like, no, I do need a cup of sugar because I'm making something. I need help. I need someone to come alongside me. And so to your point too about the resources cutting off from their own and sending somewhere else, like there's something there about vulnerability that has to be shared, exposed, like whatever that is, that you have to be willing to go to so that you can get those resources, so that you can continue. And that takes a lot of development and trust and knowing that you're in it.
It's also connected. So the sermon series we're going to do in the fall around, Jesus says you have to become like a child.
Right.
Yes.
And one of those things is about, children are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And we're not in a way that says that we have to become like that. We have to become
Yes.
vulnerable
Yeah.
and willing to ask for help. And so many times people are just so unwilling to ask for help.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm guilty of that. I mean, I'll just deal with it on my own. I don't need to,
Yeah.
I would say it's because I don't want to show weakness. It's really just because I don't want to be around other people. That's a joke. Not really.
Not really.
Joking, baby. All the people close to you goes, really? That was a joke?
I used to love people.
Yeah,
I
right.
used to
Then you
love
became
people.
a pastor.
it's funny because I realize, I say these little jokes on the side of the podcast, and people come out and go, "Yeah, I know you don't like people. Sorry to bother you."
Yeah, sorry to
I'm like,
bother you.
No,
You put it out there.
I heard you say that on the podcast. I know you don't like
Yeah.
people, so I'm sorry to bother you.
Yeah.
But will you? Can I talk to you for a minute? It's like, wow, I got to be careful what I say. So most everything is tongue in cheek, kind of a joke. But yeah, I think the vulnerability and the humility is.
Yeah. When I was preparing to preach at Fairhaven a couple weeks ago, and in the notes, it was the week that we talked about touch. And in the notes, one of the things that was written there was that adults are the only ones that, like, when they're hurt, run away. But little kids, there's something that they automatically run towards.
Yes.
People, like, there's something in that, in
We
becoming
have a boo-boo,
childlike.
which makes sense that would resonate with you as a mom.
With Timothy.
With-
Yeah. When he gets hurt, he runs towards someone.
Kiss
There's
it.
nothing I can do.
And it's not going to make it any better.
Right.
It
but
does. Maybe it does.
The touch. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, there's something about that touch, and then I think that it acknowledges the pain and, like, says that you're not alone in that moment. Like, there's power in that. But yeah, becoming childlike and
with a little
running
boy, you're
towards
going to have
people.
plenty of opportunities to
Yeah.
kiss boo-boos.
Yeah. Oh,
Boo Boo Bunny. We
Yeah.
used to have the Boo Boo
Yeah.
Bunny, which is just a little bunny that you put an ice cube in. It was like a little washcloth somebody tied. It was the Boo Boo Bunny. Ask my girls; they know what the Boo Boo Bunny.
That's funny.
That's
I
awesome.
mean, seriously, they get fall go. They get the we're at Boo Boo Bunny. That's the first thing. You got to go get where the hell is the Boo Boo Bunny? It's in a drawer
That's
somewhere.
awesome.
Oh yeah, but I mean that goes right to what you're talking about.
I think that's true because I think you end up learning and acculturating into our culture that says, when you get older, particularly with men, boys don't cry, these kinds of things,
Yeah.
suck it up, what it means to be tough, is all these things about sublimating a core part of our tenderness.
Right.
That then when we need to be tender, we don't have access to it, right? And so I wonder if Christian community is a corrective to the narrative of rugged individualism that says, no, when Paul says, let me show you a more excellent way, he's saying this is, and then he talks about community. Right, and the core of that's love, but it's all about being in relationship. I think curiosity is also something that's a core component of the trees, the root system. That if it's not just it is vulnerability in those things, but it's also like I'm curious about what's happening in that cove.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, and I can begin to then it opens up space in me to respond differently.
You're talking about storms and hurricanes, and exactly your point was, I think there were. And I say this as men, it's women too, but really in our neighborhood, we got a lot of folks who've done really well and their homes were flooded.
Yeah.
Never expected them to be flooded. They probably will never flood again for 1,000 years. Didn't have flood insurance.
Right.
And the community coming around, people who were totally self-sufficient, didn't need any help from anyone, and by coming in and helping, I think I know of several men, I'm just saying the men, that it really changed their lives. I mean,
Yes.
it changed the way they think about asking for help
Yeah.
or being willing to receive help.
Yes.
As much like receiving a gift is just as big of a thing as giving a gift. It's actually harder to receive a gift for
Yes.
some people.
Yeah.
So I think that's all a part of this. When you talk about formation, to sort of play on these roots and the connectivity in the community, how do we state that as, okay, this is one of the key ingredients. It's one of the core values of when we talk about formation. And the last thing I'll say about this, unless y'all have something else, is that a lot of young families are coming now.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many young families. And when I talk to them, a lot of them are looking for connection
Yeah.
for their children and for them.
Yeah.
People who are in a similar life stage.
Yeah. Yeah. As a parent of now an 11-month-old, there's something in this beginning that feels real isolated. Like
Yes.
right? Like
It gets real.
Yeah. And there's this section where you like suddenly are cut off from everybody because you can't get out of the house. Like you can't figure out how to you're completely navigating a new way of life. And it feels isolating in those moments, even if you have, people around you. And so, you are hungering for connection of people who can relate to the same thing that you're going through. Like I'm struggling for words, but if you threw another young mom in here, like she'd be like, yes.
Hell yeah.
Like I get it,
I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
Right. There's a somebody you and I know, Dale Ryan, who his blessing has always been, may your roots sink deeply into the soil of God's love. And I wonder if what we're saying is like we might be the root system, but the soil of where our root system is in love. If it's in self-sufficiency, if it's in having to prove yourself, that's a different soil. But if it's in the soil of God's love, and there's a young mom that's taking on more, feels like she's being overwhelmed with more than her resources, then the root systems over here can begin to push resources to her.
Yeah.
We show up with food.
Yeah.
We say, we got you. Let's take care of your kid. Let's go on a date. Those kinds of things. We do that in ways that don't look like we're being martyrs, and we don't create a program or put somebody on staff to then be, we as a root system sinking into the soil of God's love do that for and with each other. That's what I think, you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's that's the low hanging fruit one is the roots and the connection. So where it gets to one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm interested to hear what you all think about this. But you've done a lot. You need to leave, don't you?
It's okay. I got
no, but this is right in your wheelhouse.
Oh, no.
All right. Resiliency. So I'm wondering, in the terms of when I think of either the branches or the leaves, but the branches sort of resonate to me. The branches grow the branches are spiraled, and the trunk is spiraled on a live oak. And maybe the leaves are a better term for resiliency, because the leaves are there, and then when the wind hits them, they kind of roll up, to be able to deal with the adversity. So maybe that's a better connection. But I'm thinking, so how does spiritual formation, how does spiritual growth and your discipleship, community is one component of that. What is resiliency? How important is that for thriving? You've done a lot of work with this, with Iconoclast, and trying to even measure what does resiliency look like, right?
Right.
I mean, how do you define it?
Right. Well, I remember when Kitty Harris came and she talked about that. Like, one of the big components of resiliency
That's right.
is, again, the relationships that you have, that you're involved in. If you have people that are speaking into your life saying, like Buechner, the worst things aren't the last things, but I'm experiencing as the last thing. And you come to me, John, and say, Matt, I got you. This is not, let me tell you my experience, strength, and hope. My story, the worst thing ain't the last thing. And you, all of a sudden, I've got another like root system that just went work and just kind of connected me, right? And I might not be able to believe myself, but I might believe you, because you've showed up and you are now you've been a part of my root system. I'll believe you. Right. And so I wonder if resiliency is also about not just I'm strong. It's not rugged individualism. I think it's a community that gathers around a person that also provides that container of.
So this is interesting. I'm glad you brought Kitty up. And I know you need to leave in a minute, and that's fine. But because she talked about the top three things.
Yes.
Social support.
Yes.
Structured style.
Structured style. Yeah.
You remember?
Yes, I do.
So I think about discipleship. What sort of structure, accountability that leads to.
And structured style, she was saying, was basically like when it hits the fan, you have something you continue to do, a rhythm.
You have a rhythm of something
life.
that leads to the next thing.
A rule of
So that was like the general she talked about, or make your bed. Wrote a book called Make Your Bed. Every morning you start, and that starts the trigger point. So for some people, is it a morning devotional? Is it like I talked about, the Chemex pour over, mystical experience of preparing your coffee or whatever it is? I wonder about resiliency. How do we include something like that?
That's great as that trunk.
Structured style.
But isn't that
that could actually be the trunk? I mean, because there's a structure element to it.
Yes, that's right.
And support. It is the support, and it has a structure to it.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's almost like what we're like in terms of the Christian year. What we've gone through Holy Week and through Lent and Holy Week. There's something about that. We know that that's coming. And there's a cadence to that where we know I'm going to have to face and do inventory for 40 days. I'm going to be in a community of folks that are doing inventory. So it's not just me telling secrets about myself or struggling with myself. It's us as a community. I'm going to walk through Holy Week. I'm going to look at the abyss and know that God's going to go down there with me.
Right.
All those things is about the structure. I wonder, Christmas. all that stuff.
Yeah, and then like you're saying, a rule of life. Like I know that I'm going to do this inventory daily. That's kind of a check-in, or I'm going to every 3 months. It's going to be kind of an extended thing. That
Yes.
you're always building that structure and that rhythm, so that no matter what the season is, no matter what you're going through, that's always going to be there that you're going to turn to.
Yeah.
I know you had to leave, but I have an intriguing thought about the leaves, and I wonder if
Fibonacci.
Well.
Go ahead.
I wonder if the leaves potentially have something to do that we talk a lot about in the crossing, in that our faith kind of shifts and adapts as we get older.
Yes.
And it stops becoming this set of rules or things that people have kind of
must
laid down,
believe.
rigid.
Right.
Right. And then
Flexible.
it has to become this living thing, right? That can withstand the dark nights, that can move into the stuff. And I wonder if the leaves then are more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So over time, as something grows, it becomes more adaptive, not less.
Right.
Right? It becomes more flexible and able to withstand
Right.
and protect those that can't,
Right.
well, rather than less.
Right.
Well, Sarah, that's good.
It is good.
That's good.
So would that be defined as flexibility, or would you use adaptability?
Maybe both.
Yeah, I think both. But yeah.
Like a core
'Cause,
value.
so
being able to
resiliency
adapt.
resiliency is different than adaptability
It
and
is.
It
flexibility.
It is.
Yeah.
Resiliency says that something happens, like something bad happens, a tragedy, a trauma, a hurricane, a death, something. So you become resilient based on the deficit and the impact that you've absorbed, right? Adaptability says, I think it's more nimble, and it's more about everyday life things that happen and how we continue to survive. Maybe not in deep trauma, but just in ordinary life.
Right.
How do we adapt?
I think that one too is like how Christians or people move through difficult conversations.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
so it's not a hurricane that's hit, but we have something that is controversial or we disagree on. It's like, how do we move through that?
Yeah.
It's like when we're at an immature stage in our development, we just throw rocks at each other
No.
and call each other names,
Yeah.
ad hominem, argue,
Right.
comments and all that, because we don't know how to have any kind of mature, because we haven't moved,
And
like you said, to become more adaptive.
And John, that's what it hit me. That's what you've been helping us do as a community when, like the last couple of years, is you've been helping us to adapt to all the cultural stuff. So when we want to
Yeah.
go, and I want to be in the third grade kind of pond of, oh no, you're big poo-poo face head, right? And you're like, hang on, understand poo-poo face head, but this is how we're going to adapt. This is what Christ calls us, to love one another, not just to throw stones at each other.
Yeah.
And so I think I think adaptability is different than resiliency then. That's good.
Well, we're going to keep fleshing this out, but I thought that would be interesting to just talk about for a few minutes. I know you need to go, but we're really
Thanks,
kind
Sarah.
of done. We're just planting seeds
that
for
was
future
good.
conversations.
Planting
So if you're
seeds.
listening to this podcast,
planting
make
oak
sure you
seeds.
subscribe or you like or you share it, because what you've listened to today is us working some stuff out in real time. That's why I was taking notes.
There's a lot of
because
shade here. A
We
lot of shade.
oh, that's good with a tree.
Thank
That's a
you.
tree
Get that?
pun.
I'm going to be there.
That's good.
I'll be here all day, folks. Tip your waitresses.
Except that you
But I
did.
mean, we talked with Jeff
I
about
won't.
producing some imagery and
Great.
videos and materials, and that at least as an intro with around these things, and then maybe jump off to deeper levels and have conversations about
Yeah.
each one of these three.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Crazy thought. So Genesis starts with a tree and ends with a tree.
Yes.
And you have at the end in Revelation that the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations.
Good grief! Now I have to take more notes.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have the tree of life and the healing of the nations. I don't know what all that means, John, but you're going to figure that out.
We look forward to hearing from you about
And there's a tree in the middle too. There's a third tree.
Oh,
The cross.
The cross.
he just didn't do that, did he?
Cross. I did that. Microphone
didn't. No,
dropped.
you
I
didn't.
can't even drop this microphone. It's attached to a... I can mute it. Gonna mute
Here
it.
it comes, folks.
Right. So.
Three
Well, make
trees.
sure you continue on, because we're going to be talking about some of this stuff and sharing that. I think that'd be good. But hey, thanks for coming to be with us for a little
Yeah,
while.
enjoyed
I'm
it.
John Stevens,
I'm Matt Russell.
I'm Sarah Barnett.
and this is Pod Have Mercy.